This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Check the link in the description for up to 2 free months of valuable education.
Imagine being told you are going to die. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, maybe not even this year, but something inside you nobody understood was going to kill you. Then imagine your partner, your family, and your closest friends were also going to die. Many of them already have. I know you know what I'm dancing around because YouTube doesn't let you tease things, but I want you to really imagine how that feels. And imagine in the midst of this, the government, even society at large, doesn't seem to care whether you or the people that you love die. Maybe some even say it's justified. God's wrath or whatever. What do? What do you do next when you find out that disease is inside you?
Hi, I'm Tristan Johnson and this is Step Back. HIV, the virus behind AIDS, exposes when a society doesn't value all its citizens' lives. Through Herculean scientific endeavors, it's become a disease that is quick and easy to detect and can be managed through medications. It just requires societies to agree to spend the resources to fight it. I want to preface this history video. When we talk about HIV, it's not just history. It is a virus that still affects millions today. The LGBTQ+ community, people of color, drug users, sex workers, and the poor around the globe are the prime targets. Where the state can't, in the case of many developing countries, or won't, in the case of developed ones, give these groups the resources needed to fight the virus,
it says a lot about who does and does not have power in this world.
So let's rewind back to when HIV first made itself known. The situation looked not only dire, but apocalyptic. Something capable of wiping out huge numbers of people brought the specter of tragedy and death to so many communities, relationships, and families. And those who held the keys to the world's resources, they seemed content to let people die rather than lift a finger to help. It seemed like an impossible situation. Communities faced oblivion, and no matter how hard they voted, nothing changed for a long time. The brutal fight against AIDS, led by grassroots activists and organizations, was nothing short of a miracle born of necessity. And this is the story I'm telling today. Let's start with the facts. What is HIV, and why is it such a debilitating disease that even today we have not found a true cure for? Now, most of you know that I'm not a scientist, so I grabbed one off the internet. To explain what HIV is, welcome Patrick Kelly from the channel Kaporis.
Your immune system is kind of important. It's one of the reasons you're not dead right now. But people infected with HIV, or the human immunodeficiency virus, have much weaker immune systems. This makes it way easier for them to catch a life-threatening bug or even develop certain types of cancer. Now, all viruses spread by hijacking a host cell, replicating themselves in it, and then destroying that cell. And HIV infects CD4, or T cells, one of those important cells in the immune system. The lower that somebody's CD4 count is, generally the weaker their immune system is. And if that CD4 count gets really low, like less than 200 cells per cubic milliliter of blood, then that person is diagnosed with AIDS. They can also get diagnosed if they catch an opportunistic infection, a disease that they wouldn't normally catch if they had a healthy immune system. Unfortunately, once you have HIV, you have it for life. Treatments in the form of antiretroviral therapies, or ARTs, can help suppress the virus, but won't get rid of it. So keep that in mind. No matter who catches this disease, it's something they have to deal with for the rest of their life.
So how did HIV spread so far and fast? To answer that, we need to go back, even farther than the 1980s, when people first noticed something was going on. The virus, like many that have plagued us over the years, was transferred from animals to us. The ancestor of HIV is a similar virus found in primates called SIV, or simian immunodeficiency virus. HIV's lineage can be mapped through some fantastic detective work that would make a great future video. These medical detectives traced HIV's likely origin to a version of SIV found in one of our closest animal relatives, the chimpanzee. The transfer is thought to have occurred because of the bushmeat or wild game trade. It is possible someone prepared a chimpanzee for food, something not unheard of in Africa, and some infected chimpanzee blood made contact with a cut the butcher had. This transfer from animal to human was not a one-time exchange. Researchers think it has happened several times. HIV mutates more than the average virus, and those detectives have traced different versions to multiple crossovers over the years, creating different strains of HIV. The strains tied to this crisis come from a single crossover, and scientists have estimated the time and place it happened, somewhere in the African nation of Cameroon a little more than 100 years ago, around 1908. From this first transfer, the virus spread to the major Congolese city, Kinshasa, where it flourished. At the time, the city was colonial and called Leopoldville. And yes, the horrors of this period of Congolese history will be an upcoming video. There, the virus spread through prostitution and the fact that back in 1908, disposable syringes hadn't been invented. That's right, doctors at this time used glass syringes, and they cleaned them between patients only with alcohol. As you may have guessed, this wasn't enough to kill the virus, and may have in fact spread the virus to other syringes. From Kinshasa, the virus spread around the globe. In the 1960s, a bunch of Haitians moved there for work because of the common French language. However, after a nationalist movement turned Congo into the nation of Zaire, many of those immigrants were pushed back to Haiti, and HIV went along for the ride.
Back in Haiti, there was a blood plasma donation center in their capital, Port-au-Prince, and it was especially effective at spreading the disease around because it mixed all the blood together. A big no-no.
HIV made it to the US around 1969 via either a bag of infected plasma or a person. The whole patient zero story about the French-Canadian airline worker is not true.
HIV takes about a decade to develop into AIDS, so the disease went unnoticed until about 1980.
Suddenly, healthy young gay men started getting rare cancers and infections. These are the kinds of infections or cancers your immune system can typically beat easily, but in this case, they were deadly. One of the most common was something called Kaposi sarcoma, which is unique because it creates these odd purple blotches on the skin.
These purple marks on the skin became grim icons of AIDS later on. The root problem is they all had a sudden drop in their immune system. They didn't know it yet, but all these people had AIDS.
In these early days, doctors were clueless as to what was going on. All they knew was young gay men were losing their helper T4 cells and then dying. They had no clue how it spread or how to protect themselves. Many close to these early AIDS victims remember elaborate biohazard procedures both to protect the immunocompromised patients and the healthy doctors, friends, and family.
See, at this time, no one knew if touching people could spread the infection.
In these days, HIV was called GRID, or gay-related immune deficiency,
and quickly got the empathetic nickname, gay cancer.
For all these reasons, AIDS could be an isolating, lonely death. Many gay people in the 1980s, and even today, were rejected by their families for who they were. Laws surrounding visitation meant their partners and chosen families were often unable to visit.
Add in the protective measures, and you can imagine the horror and sorrow someone might experience there alone on a bed, too emaciated and weak to even move, let alone walk. Although AIDS was associated with gay men, other people started exhibiting symptoms of the disease, especially people with hemophilia, a condition which prevents your blood from clotting.
People with hemophilia require many blood transfusions, and at this time, blood wasn't screened for HIV, so they began contracting the disease. Then it showed up in infants who got it from breast milk, IV drug users who shared needles, and heterosexual women and men,
showing this wasn't just a disease confined to the gay community. After seeing these cases, doctors concluded that AIDS spread through blood, breast milk, and unprotected sex.
By 1986, two separate teams of scientists converged on HIV and discovered it was causing AIDS. Let's zoom out to the broader American society in the 1980s. Americans were at the peak of Reagan mania. People wore big shoulder pads, big hair, and were excited to hate the poor openly again.
So in this bold decade, what bold action did the United States take to fight this disease? Oh, right. They did nothing. Ronald Reagan didn't even say the word AIDS until 1985, after 5,000 people had already died of the disease.
When asked about it, the White House would respond with laughter, pointing out Americans don't really approve of that lifestyle. People were dying.
And because of politics, hatred, bigotry, and the cold black heart in every conservative. They laughed when people died alone and emaciated in a hospital bed. 300,000 people in the US had the disease, and the most powerful country on earth mocked them.
Plague! We are in the middle of a fucking plague! Plague! 40 million infected people is a fucking plague!
Okay, I'm repeating myself. This is just so baffling, and from a presidency that's looked upon positively?
Finally, in 1985, after a teenager with hemophilia named Ryan White was banned from school for having AIDS, activists had a story they could tell. Ryan White was just an innocent kid. And this kid, at long last, convinced the US to act. The Food and Drug Administration released a commercial blood test, and blood banks began to screen for the disease. And the Department of Health and Human Services and the World Health Organization held the first international AIDS conference.
So I asked earlier, what do you do when the government is content to let you and the people you care about die? Well, I guess asking politely doesn't work.
In this chaotic period, many grassroots AIDS groups emerged to help the dying, prevent further infection, and fund necessary research to fight this crushing disease. The biggest organization was the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, founded by Larry Kramer. They raised money for AIDS research at a frantic pace. Since then, they've become the model for fighting for disease research money. If the government wouldn't acknowledge AIDS victims voluntarily, activists would force the issue. ACT UP and other groups staged protests, placing a large AIDS quilt in the National Mall. They crashed the New York Stock Exchange bell ringing ceremony. One of the most hardcore actions I found was activists threw the ashes of dead AIDS victims at the White House and demanded they be seen.
Before I get into the major scientific breakthroughs that prevented HIV from becoming a death sentence,
I want to point out, even today, the most significant factors preventing HIV from spreading aren't expensive pharmaceutical inventions, but social programs. ACT UP did the necessary work setting up needle exchange programs, creating education campaigns, and distributing condoms to those that needed them.
the effectiveness of the programs I mentioned earlier are exactly why I said that HIV is a disease that affects those without power. Those who the wealthy have determined are unworthy of the necessities of life. Activists' hard work turned this disease around.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some significant scientific breakthroughs that made spreading the disease harder and, most importantly, make living with the disease more manageable. With activist research money and eventual begrudging support of the government, several major medications and therapies turned HIV from a death sentence to something manageable.
The first significant breakthrough came in 1987.
Scientists developed a medication called azithromycin, better known by its easier to pronounce acronym, AZT. AZT was a true marvel of pharmaceutical research. It could not stop, but could slow the disease's progression, buying people precious years. But AZT was also profoundly expensive, which meant many couldn't afford it. Despite going on the market in 1987, deaths from AIDS peaked in 1995. In 1997, a new combination of treatments called highly active antiretroviral therapy, or HAART, became the standard, cutting AIDS deaths almost in half over the next 3 years. In 2003, the FDA approved HIV test kits, which can detect the disease in just 20 minutes.
Today, medical science has progressed to the point that while you can't cure the disease, you can make it basically untraceable in your system and prevent you from spreading it.
Another drug option called PrEP can help people who might be at risk of contracting HIV from getting it in the first place.
Okay, to be able to tell these lesser known stories from history, I need to pay the bills. So you might have noticed some improvements in the editing on the channel here, and for that you can thank this video sponsor, Skillshare.
Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for improving your writing, and in my case, animation and filmmaking skills. With a premium membership, you can get unlimited access to high-quality classes from experts working in their fields. So, in this post-credential present, you can make yourself more valuable in the relentless competition for work.
I have been learning a lot about how to use the Adobe After Effects program that I've been using for over 2 years now. With Learn Motion Graphics in 3 Hours by Daniel Scott. But if you want to make videos like I do, it's a good and affordable way to learn. Less than $10 a month, which is way cheaper than a community college program. Something I know from experience.
Now, if you want to check it out, Skillshare has given me a promo link, so the first 500 people who sign up via this link, which you can also find in the description, get 2 free months, and you help out the channel tremendously when you do it. Thank you, Skillshare, for helping me give attention to histories that sometimes get forgotten.
After HAART became the standard treatment, deaths from AIDS plummeted, at least amongst those who could afford it.
As it affected them less, many middle-class white people in the LGBTQ+ community moved away from AIDS activism to fight for civil rights, specifically the right to get married. Though the ghosts and trauma of so many dead partners and friends still haunts many older LGBTQ+ people to this day.
This didn't mean, however, that HIV was gone. Interest and resources for fighting the disease did, but the disease is still prevalent around the globe.
To this day, though there have been some improvements, the Global South still suffers huge HIV infection rates. The spread of HIV is preventable, but the legacy of colonization and current colonization under the rebranding of neoliberal global capitalism leaves these people in massive debt to rich countries. And without the resources to give those with HIV the medicine, education, and social programs necessary to control the disease. Some initiatives to help control HIV in the Global South have occurred, but they are nowhere near sufficient. And even in the first world, HIV is still around. Those lives society doesn't value, people of color, the poor, injection drug users, sex workers, and the trans community struggle with disproportionately high numbers of HIV infections.
In some places such as Mississippi, the HIV epidemic is actually getting worse rather than better. It's gotten to the point where almost half of black men who have sex with men will contract the disease in their lifetime. This is a state that voted against expanding their minuscule public healthcare service, Medicaid. As I've said before, HIV is a disease that we can beat. But to do so, we need to establish that healthcare is a right for everyone. We need to value the injection drug dealer's life the same as the CEO. And it seems the free market just isn't up to the task. We all drop the ball. You, me, everyone. But we can't just rely on a political solution, because anything established by the government can just be undone by the next administration. We need to, like when ACT UP was founded, realize that in health, in justice, and in equality, we can't just toss in a ballot every few years and wipe our hands and say we did our job. We need to build the things to make the world better now, in your community, in my community, with our own efforts. No act or change in government is going to make a solution that can't just be taken away. The only solution to the world's problems that can't be voted away by the next administration is one we make ourselves. And when you think that the problems of the world are just too big or too hopeless, think of these people who faced literal death in Armageddon and had no allies in power. But with hard-fought victory after hard-fought victory, they forced the world to listen. They didn't ask nicely, but demanded their right to exist.